Somehow Ayatollah Khomeini returned. Well, no black magic here. It is his son, newly elected by Iran's Assembly of Experts. And he is being dropped into a spicy situation, with rumors that the United States is considering putting boots on the ground to take another swipe at Iran's nuclear program. So today, let's look at the intersection between the two headlines: who the new Ayatollah is, what his plans may be for Iran's nuclear program, and what the United States might do in response. Starting with who the new leader is, no major surprises there. The Ayatollah, the son, was the only candidate of note on the prediction markets, and peaked above a 75% chance before the official announcement. If there is anything directly notable here, it is that he was his father's preferred pick, perhaps indicating that his father still commands a shadow on Iran's government from the grave. As for what the Ayatollah, the son, stands for, no need to spend too much time on that. The United States and Israel combined together to kill his wife, his father, his mother, and one of his brothers. He already had a reputation for being more of a hardliner than his father. I do not think anything from the last week and a half has changed that. As we discussed, both during the lead-up to the war and in the immediate aftermath of the father's assassination, as compared to Venezuela, Iran is both more ideologically inclined and has a more institutionalized autocracy. Both of those points meant that there would be no Delcy Rodriguez-esque solution, as there was the case in January. Indeed, the son's succession shows how Iran's broader political apparatus feels about the war situation. Collectively, they could have chosen someone else as Ayatollah, someone that could have credibly extended an olive branch to the White House and tried to end the conflict. They did not. More subtly, we ought not to forget that, right before the war began, Iran was experiencing its greatest domestic turmoil most of us can remember. The Assembly of Experts could have chosen someone else as Ayatollah, someone that could have credibly extended an olive branch to the people of Iran. They did not. Ironically, this plays into the U.S. strategy to provide air support to create conditions for protesters to become the de facto boots on the ground. That is something to keep an eye on, and it likely means that we are looking at a longer war as the White House tries to accommodate that. Also, given how thoroughly U.S. intelligence penetrated Iran, one wonders how long he will stay in his current position. In the interim, the context of the Ayatollah's appointment is discussion of the United States itself putting boots on the ground. And we should spend a moment describing what this is and what this is not, because some of the media conversation there has extrapolated a bit too much. Two quotes drove this story. One came from Pete Hegseth in one of the first media scrums after the war began. A reporter asked whether the United States would put boots on the ground. He refused to take a position, citing that any indications there would spoil military plans to Iran as well. More recently, Trump on Air Force One, again addressing reporters, said that boots on the ground is, quote, something we could do later. We wouldn't do it now, end quote. This falls very much into the category of ignoring what leaders say and instead focusing on what they do. It is easy to fall into a trap that the United States will soon invade Iran, just as was the case with Iraq in 2003. But if we paid attention to what Bush was doing in the lead-up to the Iraq War, he was deploying a ton of army personnel into the surrounding region who could actually do the invading. Trump has done nothing of the sort in Iran. It is the same reason why it was easy to predict a few months ago that there would be no traditional invasion of Venezuela. You cannot conjure an invasion force out of thin air. Back to Iran. Could the United States one day invade Iran? Sure. I am not sure that would be a good idea, but sure, it could happen. It is just that we would have ample warning that an invasion is plausible, and we basically have zero evidence of that today. Of course, I had to be very careful with my explanation there, because the United States did, in fact, put boots on the ground in Venezuela. It was just not a traditional invasion. It was a 3-hour-long special Maduro operation to extract the country's leader from Caracas. In and out, just as Trump prefers. Well, special forces operations remain very plausible in Iran. The only question is what they might do. Caracas is right on top of the Caribbean. It was simple enough to push a landing party into a presidential compound, and by simple enough I mean something that likely only the United States has the military capacity to do. The point is, US armed forces were not fighting geography here. In contrast, Tehran is all the way up here, roughly in the north-central part of the country. That is a lot of airspace that a landing party would have to traverse. US pilots have made the war look easy so far, at least when they are not in Kuwaiti skies. But there is a big difference between flying planes over the country and trying to push landable helicopters that distance. Never mind that once you land in Tehran, you might face all sorts of government forces who are ideologically inclined and angry about everything that has happened thus far. Consequently, the real determinant of whether US boots will find themselves on the ground is what possible utility they could provide in regions they will not immediately perish. And the conversation there has turned toward nuclear weapons. Rather than worry about what is happening all the way up in Tehran, the nuclear focus is instead on Isfahan, site of one of the key facilities of Iran's nuclear program. You may remember it as one of the targets during the US airstrikes back in June, notably via Tomahawks, and not the massive ordnance penetrators that hit Iran's other two sites. Well, it appears that one of the effects of those strikes was to entomb a collection of highly enriched uranium inside a storage bunker at Isfahan. Let's spend a moment on the science behind what is happening here, because that was key to understanding the pre-war negotiations, and it remains key to understanding the military situation. Iran has about 970 pounds of uranium enriched to 60% purity of the fissile 235 isotope. That is good enough to produce about a dozen bombs, with the caveat that the exact number would depend on the design and intended yield. Unfortunately for Iran, 60% is not good enough to actually place in a bomb. 90% is the standard mark for weapons-grade fuel, though Iran could hedge that down a bit. But either way, 60% is not enough. To truly finish the program, Iran would need to extract the stockpile and run it through uranium centrifuges to purify it further. Although the difference between 60% and 90-ish% may seem like a lot, it is not. Naturally occurring uranium consists of less than 1% of the 235 isotope, but it gets easier to refine as you go. In fact, going from the natural stuff to 5% is about half the work. 60% to weapons grade is a relative blink of an eye. So, all told, the Iranian plan would be Phase 1, retrieve the uranium. Phase 2, spin it in some centrifuges. And Phase 3, assemble it in a bomb. Up to Iran to figure out how to profit afterward. Well, we are still in Phase 1 here, but reports indicate that, earlier this year, Iran was constructing tunnels to try to access the sealed-off uranium, with satellites observing mounds of dirt forming nearby. Now, at the start of the current hostilities, the United States did not bomb Iran's nuclear sites, despite having immediately jumped on them last June. Rather, it seems that war planners aimed for Iran's nearby defense infrastructure. The lack of urgency signals that the United States believes that Iran is not about to act on Phase 1 of that three-phase plan. It also puts us in a weird position where the administration's claims from last year that Iran's nuclear program was completely obliterated are false, but also that the reverse claims from Iranian officials and public skeptics that the strikes were irrelevant are also false. As for intentions, the new Ayatollah is not the type of person about to reverse course here. You may notice that I try to be careful to describe Iran as having a nuclear program, rather than a nuclear weapons program, because the father Ayatollah issued a fatwa against nuclear weapons in 2003. Cue the say versus do criticism. Western intelligence has no doubt that Iran is building nuclear infrastructure for the purposes of developing a weapon, and there is almost no reason to enrich uranium to 60% purity, except for as a stepping stone to weapons-grade uranium. The nuclear scientists were just waiting to receive the political thumbs up. Meanwhile, the new Ayatollah is a part of an IRGC faction that is historically critical of the anti-nuclear fatwa. Thus, you have someone who likely wants to dispose of a document that no one in the West believed had any real merit to begin with. That leaves the question of how the United States might go about destroying the uranium sitting in Isfahan. There is skepticism that another series of airstrikes could do that, so let's instead spend our time analyzing the alternatives, namely by having boots on the ground to physically destroy it. As a starting point, you can forget about deferring the operation to someone else. Kurdish forces, allegedly linked to CIA operations to start an organized resistance to the Iranian central government, are all the way in the northwest corner of the country. Even if they wanted to, and I doubt that they would, there is no way that they could get all the way to Isfahan in a meaningful time frame. Consequently, we are looking at a U.S. Special Forces operation, hence all of that earlier discussion about boots on the ground. If that is the White House's plan, then the war will need to continue for at least another week. Remember, these are helicopters that would have to land, and the United States would first need to exert more effort to attrit any of the dangers that could lie between the Persian Gulf and the Isfahan site. So you could send in some Chinooks and Blackhawks, land, make your way into the tunnels, and probably blow up the uranium. There is no need to remove it. The uranium is currently in a gaseous form, because that is what you need to run the centrifuges, and Iran could not recover the gas once it leaks. That simplifies the operation at least to a small degree, as there need not be a conversation on how to extract hundreds of pounds of metal. You only convert the uranium back into a solid when you are ready to assemble a bomb, which Iran is not yet ready to do. Radiation would not be much of a concern here. One, because U.S. Special Forces would be doing it in a confined place underground, and two, because uranium is not nearly as hazardous as the type of gunk that a nuclear power plant produces. Chernobyl, this would not be. But before anyone gets trigger happy, let's discuss some of the problems and alternatives here. As a starting point, I cannot imagine planning an operation to go into those tunnels. When the United States conducted the Bin Laden or Maduro raids, Special Forces teams had replicated the target compounds. Any surprises day of were reduced to a minimum. It is possible that the United States also has blueprints for Iran's underground facility. But does the United States know the damage done to the facility? And does the United States know the new makeshift access tunnels? I would be skeptical. I also personally would not want to go into those tunnels blind. Moreover, if those tunnels are not in good shape, this is an operation that could last hours on end. Think about all of the additional logistics of having to hold that territory for long periods of time, because I doubt Iranian troops would just sit there while it is happening. Second, Isfahan is probably not holding Iran's entire stockpile of enriched uranium. Thus, a successful operation may reduce the number of nuclear weapons that Iran could build, but it will not eliminate all of Iran's fuel. Third, given that, why not focus on targeting Iran's centrifuges instead? Centrifuge facilities have a much larger footprint. And remember, the uranium in its current form is worthless without the ability to refine it further. Finally, reports indicate that U.S. intelligence is constantly monitoring the site. Why not just bomb the new construction and any additional entry points whenever Iran tries to build further ones? That has to be less risky than the alternative. None of this conversation rules out the United States putting boots on the ground for other Special Forces operations, but it does tell us that this one in particular would be quite the bold play. If you want to learn more about the Iran war, check out this playlist I have on the broader conflict in the Middle East. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.